Okay, thank you for signing up for this on-demand webinar on access and action-based integrations and why your product team ultimately needs to build both. I am Anurag. I work in product marketing here at Alloy. I'm joined by Greg, who is our co-founder and CTO. To set a quick agenda for the day, we'll start by introducing access-based integrations, which, to give you a quick preview, is the ability to push and pull data from third-party apps in real time. So no real need to orchestrate complex workflows or connect more than two applications. Just the ability to sync data in real time continuously and present it in either app's interface, depending on what's called for. Then we'll have action-based integrations. So we'll discuss the differences and the fact that action-based integrations are more about connecting multiple applications in an effort to automate time-consuming processes. So this is more traditionally what you would think of as like workflow design and integrations. So we'll get into a more detailed explanation of that later on. And at the end, we will provide a quick recap, also talk about how Alloy can help launch both types of integrations more efficiently, and provide some actionable next steps for your team.
Thanks, Anurag. Super excited to share the overview of how access versus action-based integrations work. So let's first talk about access-based integrations. At a high level, access-based integrations allow you to sync data from third-party apps to your own in real time. Now, the difference between access and action-based integrations is primarily the number of integrations involved. For instance, with access-based integrations, we're typically having a maximum of 2 platforms. So in our example here, we're saying we're going to build an in-product revenue dashboard. And we're saying we want to pull information from 3 different commerce providers: BigCommerce, Shopify, and Magento. And we're going to use Alloy's unified API to do just that. This is an example of us pulling information and sending it to our platform. So you have 2 applications at play. You've got a third-party service, which could be BigCommerce, it could be Shopify, or it could be Magento, but it's going to be one of those 3. And then the destination is going to be your platform. And the nice part about this is it's typically very, very simple integrations, right? So we're pulling data, we're not manipulating the data, we're not, having a complex flow or anything like that. There's no crazy logic. It's typically pulling and pushing data to and from. So some common challenges you might experience. So you might be asking, well, why can't I just do this in-house? And the answer is you probably can, but there's a lot of just repetitive work involved typically. There's a lot of repetitive work, a lot of infrastructure you need to build, and it's just difficult to scale. And so we'll cover that in a second here. So on the repetitive work front, let's take a look over here at the varying data models. So we've got Shopify, BigCommerce, Magento, and WooCommerce. What you'll see is that each of these different models has different data points. And if we want to map, for instance, the order number is manifested differently in each of these products, or in each of these models, rather. You would need to map those individually at every application you build. With an access-based tool like Alloy's Unified API, we map that for you. So there's a common structure that you can just hit to always access the most updated information. So behind the scenes, Alloy's Unified API is maintaining a single cache. In other words, we're subscribing to all the webhooks in real time. We're also enacting polling to make sure that all the data is up to date. So when you hit our APIs, you always are ensured you have the most relevant, most up-to-date information possible. And lastly, these integrations are typically hard to scale, right? Whenever you build an integration, you always need to worry about rate limits, storage capacity, you name it, bunch of challenges. Our technology abstracts all of that behind the scenes. So you're literally just going to make an API request to Alloy's Unified API. We will always return you the most accurate and most updated information. You never need to worry about any infrastructure behind the scenes. All right, moving on.
Okay, thanks, Greg. So now we'll talk about how Alloy's Unified API can actually help you launch access-based integrations more efficiently. So to provide a brief overview of what it looks like to create an integration in Alloy's Unified API, it really boils down to 3 steps, right? The first is syncing data from related apps in a single category. This is literally done with a click of a button to turn on the relevant integrations that are supported within Alloy. And so for Alloy, right now with the unified API, we have common data models for ERP platforms and accounting platforms, for e-commerce applications, and for CRMs, which is going to be in beta here very soon. And so essentially what we're doing with the unified API is taking the varying data schema, varying API nuances between these applications, and instead standardizing that data and synchronizing it continuously, so that way your team can hit our catch and get standardized data in real time, as opposed to having to deal with those API nuances and varying data schema of each application within a category. So once the data is standardized in our catch, again, all you have to do is hit that, as opposed to hitting each app's API, and you'll get that data continuously synced to your application in real time, as Greg mentioned. And then the third step is presenting via something called the Alloy modal. So essentially what this is a component that will live directly in your application once you embed Alloy's front-end SDK. And essentially what you can do is completely configure that with your own brand colors, your own integration descriptions, your own logo, as opposed to Alloy's, and present the integration as a completely native experience. So anytime a user launches one of the integrations that you create with Alloy's unified API, this is the type of flow that they would see. Okay, so just to provide a more detailed look at this, on the left side, you can see that we have 4 e-commerce applications: Shopify, WooCommerce, BigCommerce, and Magento. And as you can see, different objects are labeled differently within these applications, which is what we were talking about in terms of varying data schema, making things challenging, launching different applications even within the same category. So what Alloy's unified API is doing is we're subscribing to all incoming webhooks and syncing that data continuously in real time. That's being standardized and stored in the unified API catch, right? So essentially what you're seeing that here is the standardized data model for e-commerce. And as you can see, each one of those objects is now standardized, as opposed to, having variance depending on the app that you're dealing with. And then from there, all you're doing is accessing that via our APIs. So you can post, patch, and get data, right? And so ultimately you can build bidirectional syncs for basic access-based use cases and just continuously sync data using the unified API without having to deal with each app's API documentation, subtle nuances that are associated with that, the types of things that ultimately will delay projects.
So now let's talk about action-based integrations. So we previously covered access-based integrations. Action-based integrations are different because they're typically involving 2 or more platforms. And the major difference beyond that is that they typically require multi-step and complex integrations, right? So this is typically, you might have 2 or 3 apps involved, you might have logic, you might have conditionals, all these sort of rule sets that would create a more complex integration. All of that logic and all those rules lives within the provider you're using. So in our example, Alloy's embedded iPaaS allows you to have all of those logic and all those rules built into our system. And you can configure all of that. So let's take a look. Some of the common challenges that you typically encounter when building an action-based integration are as follows. API complexity is always a challenge that you encounter when building an integration. For instance, our NetSuite integration is over 200 APIs that are supported. When you're building over 200 APIs, if you're doing this out of the box yourself, you would need to map these APIs, review them, and have a deep understanding of what each of these APIs does. Fortunately, Alloy's embedded iPaaS abstracts that for you. So you can go in, you can simply search up sales order, and then you can find all the relevant APIs for you. We've done all that work behind the scenes. On top of that, we also have managing and management. So when you use an embedded iPaaS, you never need to worry about updating the APIs, the API version change. These are the common things that occur with building an API and maintaining an integration. We manage that for you. So you can always rest assured that we're going to make sure the API is the most up-to-date, and any changes are always added as support for on our platform. So you can rest assured your team doesn't need to worry about these sort of things. And then on top of that, common issues like, for instance, failed executions, error logs, scaling up, these are things that we also abstract as well. So major focus on how we abstract things, how we make your life easier with the embedded iPaaS. And lastly, and honestly, a very important thing is custom configurations. So typically speaking, an integration is only as complex as you make it. A lot of tools, increasingly these days, require custom fields, and users want to have more and more complexity, and they want to have more customization. Our platform, our embedded iPaaS, allows you to support that out of the box. So you don't need to worry about custom mappings and custom fields. We support that behind the scenes for you.
Okay, so as we did with access-based integrations, we're going to show you briefly how Alloy's embedded iPaaS can help you launch action-based integrations more efficiently. So out of the box, it's worth mentioning that Alloy's embedded iPaaS specifically supports 220 plus integrations, which makes it very simple to build workflows across different categories, right? And so as you can see here, some of the more major ones, e-commerce platforms, accounting and ERP, CRMs, marketing automation platforms, a lot of high impact, high value integrations. And ultimately what you're doing is configuring this to your specific use case, but you're not building the infrastructure, you're not building everything and defining workflow logic from scratch, right? And that enhances productivity. All right, so to provide a brief overview of what the process looks like on the embedded side, step one is integration setup. So in a drag and drop visual workflow builder, which you've seen if you're familiar with Alloy, if not, we'll point you to some resources that can show it following this webinar. But you can build integrations in a drag and drop interface that are specific to the use case that you need for your customers, right? So whether that's with key help desk platforms, CRMs, as we mentioned, any of those major categories, you can select from that library of 220 plus integrations and get jump started on your use case. The second step would be to embed the SDK, our front-end SDK, into your code base. Once that's done, the rest of the setup process is completely no code, but ultimately this is what enables you to render the embedded modal, which is that built-in authentication component I mentioned earlier within your application. And then once you're ready, you can publish the integrations and the workflows that you've built, and you can publish those either alongside existing integrations that you already have, or if it's the first time that you're standing up an integration for your company, you can use Alloy to stand up your marketplace from scratch as well. And ultimately, users are presented with a native integration experience, as I outlined earlier, wherein they can just go in, enter their credentials for each application, and not have any sense of the fact that Alloy is powering things behind the scenes, unless, of course, you want them to, for whatever reason. And then as promised, I just wanted to provide a link to an additional resource that can help you see the process in action. So in this intro video that's just posted directly on our YouTube channel, you can go in, see the process of building a bidirectional integration with Alloy Embedded. If you have, 5 to 10 minutes over the course of the next couple of weeks, just scan the QR code on the screen. It'll bring you directly to it. And hopefully it'll give you the context that you need. Okay, so to recap, access and action-based integrations are both a critical part of any SaaS company's integration strategy, right? On the access-based side, you might have a use case like dashboarding and analytics, for example, where a user comes to you and says, hey, it would be really great to see in real time, for example, if you're building a logistics app, all of the order fulfillment information from my other e-commerce applications in your application so that I can just get that data in one place. The integration that's required to create something like that is relatively straightforward, right? You're just accessing data in real time from users' e-commerce platforms, but ultimately that is still really high value and makes your product stickier. And then on the action-based side, you can help users orchestrate more complex processes, right? And so ultimately what that looks like are more common integration use cases that you might think of in terms of things like lead routing, marketing personalization, automating abandoned cart campaigns, the types of things that are going to help eliminate manual processes for your users and thus enable them to scale their businesses more effectively, come to rely on your products more, etc. And then lastly, Alloy is one of, if not the only integration platform with designated products to help accelerate the development of both of these integration types. And so, as I mentioned in more detail earlier, right, Alloy's unified API, by hitting common data models that are associated with the app category that you need to integrate with, You can quickly launch real-time access-based integrations with, let's say, BigCommerce, Shopify, and Magento in a matter of minutes. And then with Alloy embedded, you can orchestrate more complex workflows, right? So if you're building action-based integrations, you can use a drag and drop workflow builder to define what you need it to do versus needing to create all of the integration logic programmatically. Okay. So lastly, in terms of next steps, there are a couple of common ones. The first would be if you're looking to discuss your use case, you're still not sure whether Unified API, Alloy Embedded is the right solution or for your problem, you can use the QR code on the right to book a call with our team, discuss your roadmap, get whatever insights we can offer you. And then alternatively, if you are ready to launch an access-based integration, our Unified API is a completely self-serve product that's available for free. So feel free to visit app.runla.com/sign up to create your account and start testing your use case immediately. Okay. Thank you all again for attending, and we look forward to providing more product updates in the near future.